Such a full complement of the membership here. We're going to begin. Rules Committee will come to order. We're here for consideration of H.R. 1076 to prohibit federal funding of National Public Radio and the use of federal funds to acquire radio content. And Ms. Blackburn, since you've joined us, we'll call on you. You're up.
All right. Grab my glasses so that I can...
We've all been waiting patiently, so since 3 o'clock. We're glad to have you.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank the committee.
You want to take the microphone and lower it there so I can...
Be happy to. Short people have to do that. What I have that is before you, and you all have the letter, H.R. 1076.
I don't know what letter you're talking about.
Oh.
What letter is that?
It is a, no, it is a statement. It did not go to you in a letter. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I apologize for that. It addresses H.R. 1076. It is a bill to get the federal government and federal taxpayers out of the business of buying radio programming that they may not agree with. This is a good bill. It's long overdue. And regardless of what someone may think about NPR or its programming or statements by some of its management, the time has come to cut the umbilical cord from the taxpayer support that has become as predictable as any entitlement program that we have in this town. It is 2011 and much has changed. So much has changed since the Corporation for Public Broadcast was first created, followed by its creation of National Public Radio. Today we can have multiple listening choices: analog radio, digital radio, satellite radio, streaming radio over the internet, and podcasts, both commercial and the self-published variety. Choice and available content is not the problem. If you want to find it, the only question is where are you going to find it? In these challenging economic times, committing the taxpayer to fund content, including content he or she may not agree with, highlights this absurd anachronism of the past. It is time to move forward and let public radio spread its wings and support itself. This legislation does several important things. Number one, it prohibits direct federal funding of NPR, and more importantly, it ensures the American taxpayer will not be funding through their tax dollars radio programming from NPR or other outlets with which they may not agree. It is also important to recognize that this bill does not defund public radio stations. They still may use federal funding to operate their station or produce their own programming. This is something that can be done locally. Public radio stations may also continue to purchase programming from NPR or other sources, just not with federal taxpayer dollars. And this bill has no impact on television. This is just for NPR. The added benefit of this legislation is that it ensures that if taxpayer dollars are necessary and given to local stations, it will not be used to purchase generic national programming, but instead can be used to produce local content to meet the needs of the community. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blackburn. Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's nice to see you, Ranking Member Slaughter, all the members of the Rules Committee. It isn't very often that I've appeared at the Rules Committee over my tenure in the Congress, but when I am here, I'm glad to be here with you, and I thank you for allowing me to speak today on something that not only I care about, my constituents, but I believe the people of our country. First of all, Mr. Chairman, I want to speak to how this thing has been handled. To put it mildly, I think there's room for great improvement. The bill should have come through the committee that Representative Blackburn and myself are members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. As the ranking member of the Communications and Technology Subcommittee, it has jurisdiction over this very issue. So we were not afforded any kind of an opportunity to hold a hearing or more than one hearing on this bill. I think it's important to do that. When people listen to us talk about process, it may make their eyes glaze over, but we know that that's the work that we must do. So members didn't see this bill until yesterday, 48 hours before it's coming to the House floor. So I think that that is violative, most frankly. And I also think it violates the 72-hour rule that the Republican leadership adopted with a great deal of fanfare in January. But I don't want to just concentrate on that. Let me speak to the whole issue of NPR and what I believe it represents to our country. First of all, the very first word, the N beginning with N, national. This is national, and the next word is public. National, public. So this is the only radio station that is national and public. And that's why there has been some tax dollars that have gone to help to pay for this programming. It by no means funds the entirety of NPR, but it is a contribution on behalf of the American people for a national public radio system in our country. Now, we all have our likes and our dislikes. I think it's what makes America and every region of America and every part of America so interesting and so fascinating. I learn when I listen to NPR. I think it's programming that is, in my view, second to none. I doubt that Ms. Blackburn feels that way. But I don't want to take away the opportunity that other broadcasters have, using the public airwaves, I might add, that are owned by the American people. I think sometimes broadcasters might forget that. They never bought and paid for those airwaves. The public airwaves are exactly that. They are public airwaves. So there's all kinds of programming. So some may want to listen to Rush. Some may want to listen to classical music. Some may want to listen to reporters that are in Kandahar and on the ground and giving a different perspective in terms of what's happening there. But I think that it is very important to our country to learn about each other, even if they are things that we don't agree about. I have learned more about the Deep South in listening to NPR and its programming than I did when I was growing up and going through school. But it makes me appreciate the parishes that are there. The parish that I came from was St. Francis of Assisi. That's the parish that I knew. I didn't know about the parishes in Louisiana and New Orleans. So I think that there is a real beauty and a depth to national public radio. And it is a voice that speaks to the many. And in a democracy, I think we do harm. I think we do harm when we target something, and I believe that this is out of disagreement with what National Public Radio broadcasts, including All Things Considered, Morning Edition, Weekend Edition Saturday, Weekend Edition Sunday, Talk of the Nation, Tell Me More, All Songs Considered, World of Opera, The Thistle and Shamrock, Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and then the programs that are distributed by NPR, One Point, The Diane Rehm Show, Fresh Air, Latino USA, On the Media, Car Talk. I love Car Talk. I mean, on my way to Mass, I want to tell you, I can't wait to hear those brothers. And I love their Boston accent, Jim. But at any rate, I think that what each member here on the panel needs to appreciate, if you don't already know it, is that each station is independently owned and operated, and it tailors its programming choices to serve your, and my local community. So I think that this is a source of pride to our country. I understand the need to pull in our belts, but I think that this is, excuse me for using the analogy, this is like an automatic rifle with rifle shot that's going all over, and it's indiscriminate. It's indiscriminate, and it's doing damage or will do damage to things that are a real source of pride to our nation and speaks to the fabric of our country and our communities and the different ways people live and express themselves in our country. That's the richness of America. And national and public belongs to all of us. This $71 million that H.R. 1076 knocks out, it's probably 1/8 of the total amount that's appropriated by the Congress for, if I have this correct, $71 million for it was $71 million in FY 2010. If you distribute that $71 million community by community across our country, I think that there isn't, these dollars dance in terms of what reaches the American people. And I think that this programming is exciting. I think it can, it sparks debate with some people because they don't agree with it, which I think makes it that much more fascinating and interesting. But it deepens and broadens the intellect, our collective intellect in our country. This should be a source of pride to Republicans, Democrats, independents in the Congress. I think it certainly is a source of pride to the American people. That's why they have sustained and supported funding, national and public, for all these years. They have not weighed in and complained and said, target that, get rid of it, cut it out. It's a cancer in our budget. It's a cancer in the country. It's viral in terms of the intellect of the American people. It's the exact opposite. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to share my passions about national public radio. And I do not support the bill for all the reasons that I stated. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eshoo. And let me just say that something has happened that I don't believe has ever happened to me before, and that is with two members sitting at the table with an opposite view on an issue, I happen to agree with both of you. I make no bones about being an enthusiastic supporter of National Public Radio. I have participated in fundraising drives for National Public Radio. I listen to every single one of the programs. Car Talk is one of my favorites.
It is great, isn't it?
And
yeah.
I will say that I like the clash. I happen to like following programs where I do have areas of disagreement. Mm-hmm. And I have concluded that National Public Radio is slightly to the left of me in many areas, but they have some commentators who are conservative as well. And I frankly, personally enjoy listening to the commentators on the left more so than I do on the right. I just like to engage in that kind of clash, and I think National Public Radio offers it. And when I say I agree with both of you, I mean, obviously I slightly disagree with your conclusion, Anna, and that is I happen to believe at the end of the day, with Ron Schiller having made the statement that he did about seeing National Public Radio survive without taxpayer funding, is something that we need to look at and address, and that's played a big role in leading us to the fact that we're at this meeting today. And you couple that with, obviously, the Juan Williams fiasco, and Vivian Schiller even acknowledged that, that it was a fiasco. I recognize that there's some problems that need to be addressed. I want those rural stations that, based on projections that are out there, if they were to lose 25% of their funding from the taxpayer, that they won't survive.
They won't make it.
And I want steps to be taken to ensure that there will be an opportunity for private funding of National Public Radio. I want to figure out ways in which we can expand that. I will tell you that, and I think that Ms. Blackburn appropriately pointed to this, there's some people who like it and some people who don't like it. And when I heard this figure the other day, that it only costs every American $1.35.
It's less than that.
Maybe anyway, less than $1.35.
But it's less than that, too.
Okay, less than that. Okay, so I was given that figure the other day. Well, what is it then? Tell me what it is.
77 cents.
70. Okay, if it only costs every single American 77 cents, I've got to tell you that I believe that there are a majority of Americans, I don't know what the number is, who have never even heard of National Public Radio, much less have ever listened to it. And that's why I believe, I will tell you that the largest single radio audience in this country happens to be for Morning Edition. They've had in excess of 20 million listeners. It's a very, very large audience. But if you juxtapose that to a nation of 307 million people, it seems to me that our taking steps to increase private voluntary support, which I've been part of for many years, is something that I want to do. We're here because of statements that have been made. Mr. Schiller's statement, obviously in the news in the last 2 weeks, very prominently. And we're also here because we're faced with a fiscal crisis. Now, is this going to solve our $14 trillion national debt? No, it's not, this legislation. But we've already voted on it. We voted on an even bigger level when we voted on H.R. 1. So this has been considered. I wish that we could have gone through a more rigorous process. But I will tell you, by the way, that we are not going to waive the 3-day layover requirement, because this bill does comply with it. This was put online on Monday, and so that rule is not being violated. So while this is not the perfect way to address it, the concerns that you have raised are not accurate, but I will say that we're here because of some very serious developments that have taken place. And so,
Mr. Chairman, can I just respond?
As a huge supporter of National Public Radio myself, I'm one who believes that encouraging more private voluntary support is something that I'm willing to look at and do as I can. So if you'd like to respond to that, either of you, I'm certainly happy to.
I appreciate it. I hear what you're saying, Mr. Chairman. I don't agree with you. And the two things that I just want to...
I agree with you.
I like where you've agreed with me, and I like you. But we part company on this. I think what is so essential to remember in this, and I think this is where we made part company, is you're talking about national private radio. You know, and that we can go off and we have charitable organizations that we all hopefully contribute to.
They'll be able to keep the same
that's
acronym. They'll keep the same acronym if it's National Private Radio.
But you're looking at withdrawing any kind of public participation. And so it would, in fact,
voluntary public participation.
There is voluntary today, significant.
Well, I pay my taxes, and 77 cents, according to your number, goes to National Public Radio, and so I think it's important to know.
You know what? I don't want to debate it with you. I just wanted to add a couple of points.
Well, I want to debate it. I want to debate it because I think this is what this is about. We're going to be able to debate it on the House floor.
The other thing I wanted to add to this is, and I think that that's what really, you know how there are scratchers we can buy? You know, for the lottery or whatever, and you scratch just a little bit and then you see the number. You said something, Mr. Chairman, that I think is really highly instructive, and that is that you talked about fiascos. And I'm not here to suggest that NPR or CPB are perfect. Any human organization, by its very design, because it is human, bears the mark of humanity. But if you're going to use Juan Williams or anyone else as a reason to cut either National Public Radio or CPB, then you know that this is a target. And
well,
so
let me just say,
I hope that you'll reject
if I could,
that.
let me just say that I use the word fiasco in the singular.
But we've had plenty of fiascos in the Congress.
I use the word fiasco in the singular in describing what happened with Juan Williams, and there were commentators on the left.
So is that the reason that you're cutting?
If I may?
Is that the reason you're cutting?
If I may? Thank you very much. I appreciate it. There are commentators on both the left and the right who were outraged over the way Juan Williams was treated. This was not a conservative versus liberal issue. Juan Williams' politics are much different than mine. Juan Williams is much further to the left than I. But I happen to respect him, and he used to be the host of Talk of the Nation. I appeared on his program, and I've worked with him over the decades that I've been privileged to serve here. It was a fiasco the way that was handled, harshly criticized by both sides. And it was an indication, as were the statements that came from Ron Schiller, that we need to look at a better way to deal with this. And there's been acknowledgement by more than a few people at National Public Radio that they might be better off without taxpayer funding, because they wouldn't have to have this kind of discussion or debate. And that's why I believe that, that this is an important symbol of where it is that we're going, and I hope very much that we will be able to see bipartisan support for this effort at the end of the day. Ms. Blackburn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to respond to your comments. I do think that my colleague misunderstands some of the legislation. If she wants to promote localism, if she wants to promote diversity, if she wants to give new content the opportunity to come online and be used by other stations, this is the way to do it. This will free up those local stations. They won't be able to use those federal dollars to buy programming, but you know what? They are going to be encouraged to create their own programming and meet the needs of their local communities. This is a way for us to look at public radio and say, hey, let me tell you something. You know, you can still use federal funds to operate your station. You cannot pay NPR dues, and you cannot use federal funds to buy that programming. I think that you're exactly right when you talk about looking at the way this should be addressed and why we are here. What the American people have told us specifically, repeatedly, and without hesitation is that we need to get some of these federal agencies under control, that they are not being good stewards of the taxpayers' money. They don't like misbehavior in these federal agencies, regardless of whether they see it in Congress or they see it in NPR. What they are telling us is to make certain that taxpayer money is not being used to pay for program that they don't like. Now, many of us do come from families that have supported NPR and the Corporation for Public Broadcast.
Sounds like you might be the black sheep in your family. So you said
well, no, my husband is a regular supporter of our local NPR. I have worked on fundraisers for our local public television. We have participated in this and have supported it. But you're exactly right when you say there are sources and avenues for them to raise that money that they can come back to and use to buy that programming if their local community wants them to have that on the air. Thank you.
Ms. Fox. Yes. I think so. We just have one vote on the floor. Yeah, then we'll just keep charging ahead here. And so if you want to go down and vote, we'll go ahead and do that, and then we'll not prevent these witnesses from doing so either. So we haven't had the second bell yet. So Ms. Fox. Oh, that was the second bell? Oh, okay. So, well, should we adjourn then? No. Go right ahead.
I'll come back.
Fox.
Okay, I'd be glad to
Thank you,
come back.
Mr. Chairman. I think that there is an issue here which has really nothing to do with the debate about whether we like the programming on public radio or not, and that is how taxpayer dollars should be spent. I don't think it is the most important thing to do to focus on whether we agree with what's on NPR. I happen to have been a supporter of public television. Like Congresswoman Blackburn, I've helped raise money for public television. I think we should encourage the public to give money to these sources that they use. But I think it is a matter of the situation that we find ourselves in financially in particular. I think that should be the focus. And also, there is a philosophical focus about whether taxpayers should be paying for these entities since the choices are so broad. Congresswoman Eshoo mentioned there's this, there's that, there's that. Yes, we can listen to almost anything these days, and there's no need, in my opinion, for the taxpayers to be for us to be using taxpayers' hard-earned money to subsidize anything that's available out there in the private sector. I think we really should get away from arguing over whether we agree or disagree. I appreciate what Ms. Blackburn said, but I don't think it is, that's our job here. It's, should we be giving the hard-earned money of taxpayers to support this when they can have access to it otherwise? And, you know, I have members of my family who work very, very hard in factories. They make very little money, and they're paying a lot in taxes. And I can't, with good conscience, take their money and use it on things that are not essential for the federal government to be funding. And I think that's the kind of thinking that we should have in our minds right now. And I would say that this is something that's long past due before, again, any of the controversy that became involved. But I do want to associate myself with the comments that the chairman made, that officials at NPR themselves have said they do not need this funding. I think that needs to be stated over and over and over again, that that's their opinion, so we're simply going to accommodate their opinion. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Blackburn, this bill doesn't save a dime. The money goes to CPB. They just can't use it for public radio, right? You're not saving any money.
What this bill does is to
It says that they
begin
can't
to-
use any public money for
That's right.
public radio.
Ms.
But it
Slaughter,
still
what
goes to CPB. Well, let me just,
Yes,
I want
go
to
ahead.
really
Go
sort of
ahead.
get
Make
into
your
this. Because the chairman said that this is the route that you all are on with the way this Congress is going, and I agree. It's not going to save a dime. It's not going to create a single job, but we're sort of getting used to that. But why didn't you go after television? Was Big Bird too much for you? Or didn't want to go after Sesame Street? Why just radio?
What we decided to do was to look at the way the programming takes place. Federal government jobs should not, federal government dollars should not be used to pay NPR dues, and it should not be used for the local affiliates to go in and buy that programming from the national. Now, let me give you a reason. I disagree with you on the issue of jobs. If you want to talk about creating local jobs in local communities, this is an excellent, excellent way to do it. You have universities all across this country that are looking for avenues to get content that they are producing out there. Now, every time you do that, you're going to have a local writer, you're going to have a local producer, you're going to have a local guy that runs the edit suite, you're going to have a local guy who is your audio technician, you're going to have a local guy that does that post-production.
We've got
and
pretty
they're
much
going
that
to
now,
hand
Ms.
all of
Blackburn.
that. Well, I just want to make
Okay.
certain.
Well,
I just listed off 5 or 6 things right there.
They're
Ms.
already
Slaughter,
happening.
That are
That's
going
no
to
new
create
jobs, but,
well, if it were already happening, ma'am, we would be seeing jobs created.
But you know
over and
what
over
I
and
think
over.
this is? I think this is just a personal bias that we're doing here.
Oh, no, ma'am, where
Well,
it is,
let me finish if I could.
Let me tell you, it is
Because
not,
you
no, and
said
I would
that
take issue with you
taxpayers
saying
should
that
not
it's a
pay for
personal
things they don't
bias.
agree with, right? You should not pay for anything you don't agree with. Is that
I
correct?
am saying that taxpayers do not agree with this and that their
Should not
money
pay
in
for
these
it.
economic times should not be used for
What
that.
about all of us who hate this war and whose tax dollars are going to this eternal war that never seems to stop to the tune of $8 billion a month? I would love to stop that. And what about the fact that the public spectrum that they're using is free, right? Now, you want to get rid of the deficit? Charge those broadcasters, make them pay. We wouldn't have any deficit for years to come here.
Ms.
But
Slaughter,
that
I
is
think
free.
that if you
But
would
we
check
can-
the
let's-
record,
just a
what you
moment.
will find is that that to purchase the use of that spectrum, that you have the
You have regulations.
you have the telecommunication community
Right.
that is spending $60 billion private sector job creating dollars every single year to go through those spectrum auctions.
Do you
and to
think that's an
maintain that
do you-
spectrum, and I'll be
that's
happy to
not
supply
an
you with that.
iota on the amount of money that's being spent? I understand. I understand. Recorder can't take it. But the whole idea that we shouldn't listen to anything, you don't have to listen to anything you don't agree with in the first place. But probably one of the things that's wrong in America is we don't listen to each other enough. And there's a steady diet, frankly, on commercial radio now. I would have a very hard time. Mostly I stand and foam at the mouth, actually, when I hear some of the things that are untrue. But let me tell you, I think what really burns me up today is H.R. 1, of which you all are so inordinately proud, and absolutely love H.R. 1, had $5 billion subsidy in it for the oil companies. And we talked about it here. And we said, should we be subsidizing oil companies? They don't pay us any taxes. They don't pay us any royalties. And they're swimming in money. But you talk about swallowing whatever that great biblical phrase is that I'm so mad I can't think about it right at the moment. Swallowing that and straining at a camel, something like that. $5 billion. And you want to kill National Public Radio? Let me tell you something. There was a study just released this week. It's about what's happening in if I can find the page, in media. NPR is the only one that's growing, actually, because people have discovered, number one, that they get the truth. And who says that they're getting the truth? Well, let me give you a few examples. The conservative commentators, Tony Blankley, says, I've been on it regularly for a long time. From personal perspective, they have given me plenty of access. I am clearly a right-wing commentator, and I cannot complain. Medved, NPR tries harder to be fair than any other media source. Reynolds, I have found them to be fair. I think NPR does a good job. David Brooks, who's one of my favorites. I'll listen to him any day of the week. Was really biased, I think, 10 years ago, but now it's pretty straight. Tea Party activists, all the way through. Katrina Pearson, Lisa Davis, all of them talked about how fair they were treated on National Public Radio. It has no axe to grind, Ms. Blackburn. It has no persons that they have to do commercials for. They have no allegiance to any corporation or any company here. That is so rare in America today. You know how many times newspapers, magazines, radio stations, all of them simply back off from what they ought to be telling us because they would be offending somebody who pays them money. And I agree with you. I think the federal government puts far too much in all of that. But think about that oil subsidy, and then you think about all the people in rural counties who depend on this. And think about the majority of people in the United States. The majority of people are not asking you to kill public radio. Most Americans agree that we should fund it. 69%, Ms. Blackburn, you're dealing with 69% of the voters in the United States who do not want you to do that. So I see no earthly reason for doing it unless there's some kind of bias against it. If it's because you don't want to fund anything you don't believe in, I do that every day. All Americans do that every day. All Americans have always done that since we've collected taxes. We do what we do. You may.
Sessio's been able to go down and vote. You have not yet.
I have not. May I have the opportunity to respond to one statement that was made about...
Great.
No, Mark, wait 1 second here because I don't want to cut her off unless you need to.
Well, we'll both go vote and we'll come back. I haven't voted either. So may I suspend and you go on to somebody else?
You have to stay here until you're done.
Much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I have questions of Ms. Eshoo, and I'd also ask that I be allowed to reserve additional questions for Ms. Blackburn. Ms. Eshoo, if you had to give a guesstimate, how many jobs do you think, if this matter were to become law, would be lost?
Well, while I can't give you the exact number, I think the scope of what these dollars represent and what they do in each community will give you an indication, because this bill, 1076, cuts off all federal funding to NPR. It would prevent any grants to NPR, any support extended to NPR by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and any support to NPR from public radio stations across the country. So to be clear, non-federal dollars could still be used to purchase national content, but the many stations, as I said earlier, the local stations, the many stations that depend on the federal dollars to make up a quarter of their budget or more, would be hard-pressed to offset those costs with private donations and grants. So that's kind of a winding road to answer your question. If, in fact, they're going to lose, no matter what, a quarter of their budget, that's going to have an impact on the people that work at these local stations, because they are local. As I said, these stations are in each one of our communities.
Now, Ms. Eshu, you are the ranking member of the Committee of Jurisdiction that this matter came from, am I correct?
Yes.
Did you all hold any hearings?
No, we did not. We didn't have the ability to.
Has there been even an informal discussion in the committee regarding this matter?
No.
Now, you said earlier, and I just wish to add a slight bit of correction. I believe my colleagues in the majority will make the required or requisite amount of time with reference to 3 days. They do not with reference to the 72 hours, and I don't think the rule requires them to do 72 hours if, in fact, they did it in 3 days. But for all intents and purposes, am I correct that we are proceeding here on a matter that, that in one sense of the word is from whole cloth in terms of the process?
Well, I objected to the process. I mean, the chairman of the committee says that it's according to Hoyle, but
Thank my friend.
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't make sense that we couldn't.
We have a 3-day requirement. We're not going to waive that.
Yeah, I understand.
There's going to be no waiver of the rule that says that 3 days, on the third day, the bill can be considered.
I understand.
So we have no
Mr.
plan.
Chairman, before you came in, I asked the chairman pro tem if I could reserve, and I'd like at this time to do just that, and then come back to reiterate some of the things I've asked of Ms. Eshu. I understand you, Mr. Chairman, but on yesterday, you sat right here along with me, and you were touting how proud you were of the process on yesterday. You remember when I told you that it was close but no cigar? Well, this isn't even close to the cigar box. And all I'm saying to you is that if we're going to have regular order, then we ought to have regular order.
The gentleman yield?
Yes, of course.
I thank my friend for yielding. And I began following the testimony of the two witnesses, saying to Ms. Eshu that I wish that this had been handled differently. I said that from the very beginning. And so I acknowledged this is not being handled in the most perfect way. Now, yesterday, I'm very pleased that we were able to work and make every amendment in order. This is, from my perspective, a simple up or down vote. This is a simple vote. Are we or are we not going to continue with taxpayer funding of National Public Radio?
If I could
that was the
reclaim
point.
my time.
I thank my friend for yielding.
Mr. Chairman, it's an ideological vote that's up or down, and we're entitled to that. But assuredly, you would not argue that you do not have scheduling responsibilities as it pertains to legislation. And the fact of the matter is, you could have chosen, as chair of this committee, to either accept this whole cloth thing or say, I'm not ready for it to go forward. And now you sit here and you tell me that you wish it had been done a different way. Well, it could have been done a different way.
Well, if the gentleman yield, I will explain to the gentleman exactly why it is that we're here and why it is we're considering under this structure. As I said at the outset, as I said yesterday, we could have had an open rule on the bills that are being considered on the floor today. And because of the fact that we are dealing with a Kucinich resolution, the fact that there was a commitment made that we want to have votes by 7 p.m., and I think that members want to have work completed by 3 p.m. tomorrow. That is a goal that we have. Now, I'm not saying that in any way I want to undermine the opportunity for a free-flowing debate, and I believe that we're going to have that free-flowing debate. Could we have more? Of course we could have more. I think that what brought us to this point is we've talked about the priorities. I mean, one has to responsibly add. You described this as an ideological question. Well, I don't think it's ideological, and I'll tell you why. I believe that we're in a position where both Democrats and Republicans alike are saying that we do have a responsibility to reduce spending. We believe that when you look at priorities, as Ms. Fox said earlier, priorities when it comes to spending, that with everything that's taken place over the past several weeks and months as it relates to National Public Radio, I think that this is a symbol. It is a symbol of things that are not going so well when it comes to federal involvement. And so that's why we've got, and I thank my friend for yielding.
Reclaiming my time again. Am I hearing you correctly that this is going to have some impact on the deficit if this were to become law? And I might add, let me hurriedly say, it ain't going to become the law because it'll go over to the United States Senate and die there, and we all know that. But if we want to have this ideological discussion, then let's just have it. But if you're telling me that CBO scored this matter that came from Representative LeBron, and that it's going to have an impact on the deficit, I'm here to tell you that there are going to be people that are going to lose their job if this were to become legislation. And we haven't done a single jobs bill in this United States House of Representatives since the majority has been in control. And yet we are around here nitpicking about whether or not bad things happen. If you want to talk about what Mr. Schiller said, let's talk about who got him to say it. And you tell me how proud everybody ought to be of James O'Keefe. If you want to talk about what things say, let's talk about what Roger Ailes said about what happened to Juan Williams in referencing what happens at NPR and calling them Nazis. Now, all of us know that that's a term that nobody ought to use when they are going forward. Roger Ailes, with airwaves that we control, is on Fox News. I choose to watch Fox News more than I do the others because I like to know where the right wing is coming from. But you can't tell me that this is going to have some impact on the budget other than in a negative way when however many thousands of people lose their jobs if they were to lose their jobs. When you all tried to defund this last year, it came under the aegis of this U-cut, which I say you can call a U-cut, my cut, anybody's cut. All it is just an opportunity to pontificate and try to get something across to the American public. Let me tell you what this will do. It will have a cascade effect. If by chance it became the law, then what is going to happen is local advertising is going to, in part, be diminished as a result of it. And I ask either one of the ladies to respond and tell me that that is not going to be the case.
Well, when you take out 25%, it's going to fall on these local stations, and that's the way this is structured. This is, I mean, you have to look at the structure of the bill, not just whether we like NPR or not. You have to look at the structure of the bill. It will absolutely have an impact on the local stations across the country and the people that run those stations. So, of course, it's going to have an effect on jobs. Will every single one of them lose their jobs? No, I don't think so. But jobs will be lost, and certainly this is going to put a major dent into producing national and international content for these local stations, because those dollars are used for that.
And well, Ms. Ashew, what really bothers me the most is the misunderstanding that the public has with reference to this particular matter, and also the misunderstanding of the public with reference to the use of broadband and the airwaves that are owned by the American people. Ms. Slaughter was absolutely correct. If all of these television stations were required to pay an honest amount of money, then we probably wouldn't have the problem that we're talking about. We choose what we want to look at in this country. We choose what we want to listen to or not listen to. I just said, and I meant, I look at Hannity, I look at O'Reilly, I look at Beck. I choose to do that. I don't like them, and I probably never would. Sean would be an exception to that. I happen to know him personally. But that said, I asked him once, I said, when did you become so conservative? He told me when I got rich. I said, then I understand. So we don't have a problem. But, Mr. Chairman, I've taken absolutely too much time, and I want you to know that this isn't going to have any effect whatsoever on the deficit. In addition thereto, it ain't going to become the law.
Mr. Bishop.
A couple of questions, if I could. First of all, the only thing I want you to say is wait, don't tell me. And other than that,
Pardon me?
wait, don't tell me. That's the one I like. But other than that, put all the money into Hallmark movies because I really like Matlock. That was the only thing last night I enjoyed watching. So that's my personal choice, and you can spend all your funds to help me with that. I'd appreciate it. I do have a couple of questions, and I hope, Ms. Eshoo, if you could answer, if anyone does. According to the sheet I have in front of me, that there was $5 million in direct appropriations that went to NPR last year that came from different sources like Department of Ed, Commerce, Endowment for the Arts, and CPB. Do you know how much of that came from Department of Education?
I don't know.
What about Commerce?
I don't know that.
The National Endowment of the Arts?
I don't know that.
take it.
I mean, we
Neither has
get
that
the
breakdown
information
there for
you.
me.
Yeah, I don't know that.
Part of the money came.
The only thing the NEA does is not public radio, but they do help fund some programming, particularly, I think, on television.
Well, this said.
But I don't
It's
know the
always
amounts.
announced that this, they
Yeah.
thank people who've given money to make that possible.
The sheet we have in front said it was direct funding from these different sources. You don't know how much, like the Department of Education gave in.
Well, they
direct
don't have much money at the NEA anyway, I don't think. Nowhere near an oil subsidy.
I know
Some-
how it works, Mr. Bishop, but I don't know the amounts.
All right. Somewhere along the line, somewhere will find that one out, I guess. It also says that a certain amount comes from dues to NPR. Do you know what kind of percent of money going to NPR comes from dues vis-a-vis the direct federal appropriations?
Well, there's more that comes to support NPR in terms of dues than from federal funding.
So more comes.
Sure it does. Sure it
circulars route
does.
through the
These
dues.
are major parts of their local budgets. All one has to do, I mean, KQED is the PBS station in the Bay Area. In fact, it's the most listened to public radio station
All
in
right,
the country.
but you don't know what the percentage is?
You listen to it, and you know how many times a day and night they come on to raise their funding.
But you don't know what the percentage is through the dues.
Overall, I can get it for you.
I would
I'd be glad to.
that'd be cool.
Yeah, it's a good question.
If either of you also could tell me how the dues process works. Is it an assessment that's given to local stations that they come up with? Do they do it on a per program basis?
What do you mean by assessment?
No, how does the
I
dues
mean, how do
process?
they decide?
Yeah.
It's not
How does
dues.
NPR get the
Well,
dues?
it's not
Not dues.
dues. It's
Yeah.
voluntary. It's voluntary, and
There's no
people, they have various programs
No.
relative to contributors.
No, 400 stations paid a total in dues.
Oh, you mean
to
their dues
NPR.
to CPB?
No,
Is that what you're talking about?
Will the gentleman yield to me for one second?
Okay.
If you have the answer, yeah.
No, I just have an observation based on your questions. This is precisely why we should have hearings.
All right, let
We
me
bring a
reclaim
bill
my
to the House
time.
Rules Committee.
Make your point later on.
May
I
I
simply
answer
want the
the
answer
question?
somewhere.
Amen.
Yeah.
Okay. There is a total of $67 million from CPB that is grants to NPR. Now, that money is used to pay NPR dues from member stations back to NPR, and they also use that money to purchase programming. Now, from NPR's website, this is all public radio finances that I am working from. NPR states that out of their... Is your microphone on? Yes, it is. Okay, I'll get it. Is it better? Okay. What we've got is NPR says Fees and dues paid by our member stations are the largest portion of NPR's revenue. Membership dues total, let's see, the membership portion of that is 2%. Other revenues are 6%, distribution and services 18%. See, this is why we ought to be empowering these local stations to produce their own programming. It'll be a great jobs creation program. Investment income from sources that they have invested is 7%. NPR Foundation endowment distribution is 5%. NPR Foundation support 4%. Grants and contributions are 7%. In answer to your question about the total $96 million to public radio from CPB, $67 million is that direct grant to the radio stations. They turn that back to NPR. In essence, Mr. Bishop, we are not ending public radio. There's nothing in this bill that says public radio is going to end. What we are doing is getting public radio out of the taxpayer's pocket. There is also $22 million that is allocated for national program production and acquisition. Let these local stations focus on diversity and localism and create that program and employ local fundraisers, employ local production engineers and create this. And $7 million is allocated for the radio program fund. And I will, if the chairman would desire, I'll be happy to submit this document for the record.
Mr. Chairman, if I might address what Mr. Bishop, the question that he raised, since I have this here in my hand. You asked about station membership dues. They represent $2.8 million, which is 1.9% overall of their budget. This comes under CPB, NEA, NSF competitive program grants. But I think that it's very important to go back to 1076, which is what you're considering, and I agree with Mr. McGovern. I mean, these are the things that would come out, the kinds of questions, excellent questions that would be asked in a hearing, which we didn't have the opportunity to have. But this legislation cuts off all federal funding to NPR.
Okay,
it does put a dent, a serious dent, in my view, and it prevents any grants to NPR or any support extended to NPR by CPB and any support to NPR from public radio stations across the country. So it does have a reach.
Thank you.
And if that's what you're seeking, that's what you're getting. I think it's important to get that down for the record.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
And Ms. Blackburn, especially the numbers that you gave me, those were the kinds of questions I wanted to see.
I'll give this to you. It has all those numbers, the exact percentages.
I appreciate that, too.
Okay?
Let me just ask one last question, and this will allow you to pontificate as much as you want to. I had a college professor who reveled every time I used any kind of third-person reference. So when I talked about they, he would always stop me and say, okay, who are they? Mm-hmm. When I railed against the government, it was always, who is the government? Because obviously there is not this ethereal ghost that goes out there that is the government that makes decisions. It has to be an individual person. Mm-hmm. There's a body that actually interprets that. So it's very difficult when we say, the land's owned by all the people. Who are they? I'm going to ask the same question. When you said this is National Public Radio, that's the same thing that my professor would have hit me up on. Who is the public? Who actually makes these decisions? It's not this concept out there. I certainly don't. It's not a group decision. There's got to be someone that's there. So I'll allow you to wax eloquent on that if you'd like to. That's the softball question.
Well, I hope I can wax eloquent. You're very kind, and it's a wonderful question. Who is the public? They're your constituents. They're mine. Collectively, they are the people of our country.
Except that's what he would not allow you. He would not allow me to get away with that kind of.
Well, I mean, there are people in this country that turn the radio on and listen to the radio.
But they're not making the decisions. Who are the ones making the decisions?
The decisions to what? To listen?
No. Obviously, anyone can listen. That's why, do Hallmark Movie Channel. I listen to that more.
Right.
I watch that more often.
Right.
The question is, if we say this is public radio, it's not public in the sense of people watch it. Otherwise, everything is public. The government has to have a body, a person. Decisions aren't made ad hoc. Who is the public behind National Public Radio?
Well, I think that what?
The subscribers.
No,
It is. It is.
no, that's,
The government doesn't have anything to do with
no
it.
subscriber makes the decision of what there is to watch. Otherwise,
No
it would.
government does either.
No,
Well,
reclaiming
I
my
think
time
that-
here. You're reclaiming
but I-
my time.
you
Let me
know
say,
what?
you can,
I
you
think
can
we're
all
kind
answer
of-
these. Hold on, hold on.
He asked me the questions. I'm trying to answer it.
Let me pull this one back and just say we can maybe allow everyone to think and come up with a better answer at a better time. There will obviously be time on the floor to come up with this. But if it's the subscriber, the viewer, that's public, everything on PBS would have to be Rumpole of the Bailey or British Mysteries, because the other stuff on PBS bores me. But that's what it would be. There has to be a different answer to that. Somebody is the public behind this thing, and it's not necessarily some concept that's floating out there. It's got to be something tangible and concrete. And I'll just stop right there and allow everyone to think about that. And Ed, when we do the debate on the floor, let me know the answer to that.
Thank you very much, Mr.
I'll yield
Bishop.
back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bishop. And let me just say for the record, I will fight to the death to ensure that Matlock and the Hallmark Channel does not get taxpayer funding. I understand that, did you want to offer something, Ms.
I
Slaughter?
did. I actually, not much.
I want to make sure that everyone...
I think I've done enough here. I just
then
want
shall I
to
call Mr.
repeat,
McGovern?
if I may, that
okay.
69% of the voters oppose congressional elimination. That is the public. Government funding for public broadcasting, and I yield back.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank
Blackburn.
you.
Thank you, Ms. Slaughter.
And we all went to vote. Everybody. Oh, no, I'm going to come to a Democrat. You were a Democrat, and I'm going to go to a Republican, if that's okay. And so, who's in the queue here? Mr. Scott? Mr. Webster? Okay. Now it's Mr. McGovern's turn. Although Mr. Hastings was talking when I came in, it was Mr. McGovern. But
I exhausted my time and called for the patience of a lot of people.
no, not mine, certainly. Mr. McGovern.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to talk about process. The chairman, distinguished chairman of the Rules Committee, said that Republicans haven't violated the three-day rule, and the answer is that's right. You didn't violate your new rule because the new rule doesn't live up to your promise of providing 72 hours. And let me read the quotation from Majority Whip McCarthy, the Republican Majority Whip, in an interview on December 20th. He promised reforms including, and I quote, putting bills online at least 72 hours before a vote. We will enable people to know what's happening, read the bills, and understand the debate. Better ideas will emerge, and the process will keep leadership power in check. And I just wanted to say that for the record.
Well, the gentleman
I'm
yield?
happy to yield.
I just say, are we violating the rules of the House?
No,
Okay,
we're
I just wanna make-
violating
I
your
thank my
promise.
friend for
We're
yielding.
violating
So
the
we're not-
promise.
we're not violating the rules of the
promise
House.
of the Republican leadership. Let me ask both of you, is this an emergency bill?
Mr. McGovern, I think that what we have heard from the American people, that finding areas to review how federal dollars are used is something that has to be a priority. Now, you can say, is it an emergency? Is it a crisis? Is it this or is it that? It is what the American people have instructed us that they would like for us to do, is look at how we structurally change
my
things.
time. The reason why I asked the question is because this measure has come to us, without any hearings, without any discussion. Mr. Bishop had a number of questions, which I'm sure would have been asked in a hearing in the Energy and Commerce Committee if you had one. I mean, I'm trying to understand why not having a hearing, was so important. Why you couldn't have done a hearing and maybe bring this up next week. I mean, this is not a trivial matter. National Public Radio is important to a lot of people, but I'm stunned by the process. You all promised this new process, and here we are with a bill that really should have gone through committee because it is controversial, as you can tell the debate here, and not a single hearing. So that's why I ask: is this an emergency that we had to take these extraordinary, bypass all of our processes to get here to bring this bill to the floor, tomorrow? Ms. Eshoo, is it an emergency to you?
Of course not. I mean, there is, we know as members of Congress, I mean, just, Mr. Bishop asked very good questions, and you said it's a good reason. It highlights why we're supposed to do due diligence and have hearings. We're perfectly capable. I certainly would have made the time. I'm sure that Ms. Blackburn would have too. No, I think it's You know what I think at the end of the day? There's a rush to judgment on this. I think people want to go home and say that they, some of the things that we've heard, and you're entitled to that. You have the votes for it. But I don't think you have the right case for it. I really don't. This is something that the American people embrace. They know how instructive this is. They know how they learn. They know how this feeds the soul and the mind of America. This is NPR is an independent media organization. So it's.
But in terms of process here, I think both of you would agree this is not an emergency yet. This is an emergency meeting of the emergency meeting of the Rules Committee.
The only thing I can think of an emergency right now is what I see on TV relative to Japan.
According to the Committee on Rules, this is an emergency meeting. We're not talking about jobs. We're not talking about the crisis in Japan. We're not talking about the economic well-being of the American people. We're engaged in this kind of little ideological spat over whether or not we should continue to fund National Public Radio. Now, Ms. Blackburn, given the fact that there were no hearings, would you agree that there should be an open rule so that people who have ideas should be able to bring whatever they want to the House floor to debate?
Mr. McGovern, I think that one of the things we've heard from the American people is that they want to see very simple, single-focused bills. This is a very simple, easy-to-understand, single-focused bill. It drills down on doing one thing, and that is to address how NPR spends the taxpayer dollars it gets. It's not about ending NPR.
So
we've already said that. It's about, I think that the way that having a closed rule on this is a good way to move forward because it is a single-focused issue, unlike some of the bills that have come before us in years past.
I appreciate your.
My colleague,
I'm happy to yield the gentleman.
just for one question, and I would like Ms. Blackburn to respond, following on what my friend and colleague, Mr. Bishop, pointed out about the public. Who is the American people? Same kind of question.
Sir, are you seeking a response from me?
Twice you've said, the American people have said this. And I'm just following on Mr. Bishop's notion about the public radio, and I'm trying to figure out who are the American people that told, who is that? Is that all of us, or is that some of us?
Well, Mr. Hastings, I would venture to say that the wonderful American people are the people that we interact with every single day in our offices, in this Capitol, in executing the duties that we are so very fortunate to have the opportunity to execute. They are the people that come to our town hall meetings. They're the people that stop us in the grocery store as we go to church, as we're in and out of the airports, coming and going from here, that walk up to us at any number of events that we may attend and talk to us about getting this federal government and the federal spending and the overreaching rules and regulations and the burdensome taxation under control. Quite frankly, sir, the people that I interface with every day, they are so frustrated. They know that this government doesn't have a revenue problem, that it has a spending and a priority problem, and they have had it.
Yeah, I reclaim my. You've also. Yeah, I reclaim my time. I thank the chairman. I just want to say, Ms. Blackburn, I did not believe that the American people sent a message that they wanted us to bring things to the floor under the most closed processes possible. I do not believe the American people said, let's do away with committee hearings and let's just rush things to the floor, because we want to do it. And this is this is billed as an emergency meeting, and it's not about jobs. It's about this. Now let me say one thing. I hear mentioned over about the deficit. Let me be clear. Ms. Slaughter raised this issue. Mr. Hastings raised this issue, but I want to make sure this is on the record. A preliminary report from the Congressional Budget Office says that this bill will have no effect whatsoever on the deficit and saves no money, zero money. And here's the explanation. The federal money that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting receives for radio currently supports programming and basic grants to local stations. This bill simply changes the formula of where the money goes. Under the bill, it all would go straight to local stations rather than allowing NPR to produce and local stations to acquire popular shows such as All Things Considered and Morning Edition. I say that because I don't want anybody to be under the misperception that we're saving money or cutting the deficit. We're just kind of changing the money around here. So let's not talk about this measure as a deficit-cutting measure, because it isn't. And that's I'm happy to yield to the gentleman.
And I will just say that, as you know, pending is H.R. 1, which actually does, in fact, zero funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which would
But that's not what this
include
bill
measure.
does, Mr. Chairman.
I'm telling you, H.R. 1, which this House has passed.
Right, and
I thank my friend for yielding.
H.R. 1 is, as we all know, is not going anywhere over in the Senate. But on this bill, it does not reduce the deficit by 1 cent. I think that needs to be made clear. The other thing that was kind of, I found a little bit disconcerting, Ms. Blackburn, in your opening statement, you talked about, the reason why we shouldn't support this is because people shouldn't have to support programming with which they might not agree. And I thought that was an interesting statement. Do you have any idea how much the United States government spends in subsidizing TV stations and radio stations in terms of advertising? A RAND study says that the Department of Defense alone spent over $600 million in advertising in 2007. That's all revenue that goes to support all kinds of networks and all kinds of radio stations. Now, let me just say, I don't agree with everything that's said on Fox News. In fact, I have some strong disagreements about some of the programming and some of the commentators that continue to be employed, notwithstanding some of really egregious statements, notwithstanding the fact that every Republican presidential candidate that I think is thinking of running is a commentator on Fox TV and radio right now. And yet, I'm trying to get an estimate now from the Department of Defense. If we had more time, I could probably get the exact figure. But I'm trying to get an estimate from all the different agencies, Census Bureau, others that do these advertising to the government, how much we have spent on the Fox network. Now, I don't agree with the program on Fox network, so maybe you would agree that to be fair and balanced here, that maybe we should have I should be allowed an amendment which basically says that no federal advertising dollars should be spent on the Fox network. Isn't that the same? Would that be acceptable to you?
Mr. McGovern, a couple of things that I would point to. First of all, when you talk about the CBO and they're saying there will be no difference in the score, I would point out that they use a static scoring model as they arrive at the figures that they give us. They do not use a dynamic model, and they don't expect that there is going to be any change from behavior. Quite frankly, I think when you free up these local stations and you allow them to get back out there and raise the money to purchase the program that they want to purchase, that what you're going to see is a difference. I think also when you empower these local...
If I reclaim my time, then based on what you just said, tells me that you agree with the CBO on how it scored the President's health care reform bill. What you're saying right now, you must agree with what the CBO said on that.
I agree with Ms. Fox. We are off the subject.
No, all right.
Gentlemen,
my question to you was not about, CBO has already said that this will have no impact on the budget. Whether you want, and my friends on the Republican side on various bills, they agree with CBO and CBO agrees with them. They disagree with CBO when it doesn't agree with them. So, I yield to the gentleman.
I thank my friend for yielding. I'll tell you, I do agree with what the CBO scored it. The reason they scored it as they did was that there was a $750 billion, that's trillion with a T, $750 billion tax increase that was fed into the CBO model, and that's the reason that they came up with the conclusion that they did. And I thank my friend for yielding.
What are we talking about now? Okay, all right. I thought Ms. Fox told us. But the reality here, my question to you is, why should, if you're saying that we should defund National Public Radio because some people may not agree with the programming, what's wrong with the idea that I don't want my tax dollars to go into advertising for the federal government on TV networks or on radio stations that I disagree with?
And I think when you get to the appropriations process and you're looking at the DOD budget, that's the appropriate way to place it.
It's everything. Why isn't this relevant? If you're going to go down this road right now, basically, picking and choosing, who you like and who you don't like, as to whether you're going to punish them or not, or deny them funding, I think you're going down a very slippery slope here. I think this is the wrong thing to do for a whole bunch of reasons. But what you're doing here is this is an ideological debate because there are some of you who don't like what you've heard on National Public Radio, who have exaggerated the Schiller comment, which, if you read it in its entirety and in its context, is very different than it was presented by a lot of people on right-wing radio and on right-wing TV. But you're going down a very, very dangerous slope here. I mean, it's basically kind of. I think what I'm afraid is we're going to start doing this kind of stuff. It is really kind of chilling in a lot of. It's going to have a chilling effect on news stations being independent and being able to report what they think is truly news. Ms. Eshoo.
Well, I appreciate what every member of the committee has offered today. And I want to get back to what Mr. Bishop said. Who are these people? Who is NPR? Who are the American people? Who is who? What are they listening to? There is a high degree of separation, I think, between, if I might say this, between what members of Congress are saying and what the American people are listening to and what they do. Because the facts are the facts. NPR's audience is larger than the combined paid circulation of USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, and the next top 62 newspapers. Who are these people? They are people in all of our communities across the country, whether you agree with them or not. So this is something that is valued by people across our country. It may not be valued by some people in Congress, and you're saying in the name of, I don't know whom, but I guess somebody that told you, or your husband or your spouse or someone in your district says, we don't agree with that. But the facts are the facts. We really shouldn't be living in a fact-free zone. This is something that the American people value. And it's important to know what we value, I think. I really do think that this is a value. This is a value.
When Ms. Eshoo is finished, I will.
I think this is a value debate as much as anything else. It's important to know the price of things. But there are some people that know the price of everything, and they value nothing. And what I'm suggesting here is that these audiences across our country are saying, by where they tune in, that they value this. You want to defund it? You have the votes to defund it. I think that says something. That says something.
I yield to my friend Dr. Fox, who's no relation to the network, right?
That's right. Thank
It's
you,
a double
Mr.
X.
McGovern. Just
Double
a
X.
quick comment. I really intended to make it earlier when I spoke. Congresswoman Eshoo will find out how much the American people value it when they get a chance to help support it when they know that it needs more support. That's how we'll
Well, I appreciate you saying that. The American people are very generous. Always have been, always will be.
Mr.
But I think
McGovern?
collectively, as a society, we say something with our collective dollars.
Well, I thank you, and I just will conclude by saying I think this is an ideological
I do
maneuver
too.
here by our
do
friends
too.
on the Republican side of the aisle, which I think is it's very dangerous going down this road. I again want to object to the process. This is not an emergency meeting. It shouldn't be an emergency. I guess it's called an emergency meeting, but emergency meeting to me means that we're going to do something about jobs and putting people back to work. That's not what this is about. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, may I submit this for the record? And I'll. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're learning a lot about the media consumption habits of our colleagues. Mr. Hastings, the big fan of Fox News, and our chair, Mr. Dreyer, the big fan of NPR. I don't
Don't forget
listen to
Matlock.
NPR. I don't have a radio. I have listened. What's that, Mr. Bishop?
I said, don't forget Matlock.
Matlock and
Your ratings would go through the
Hallmark.
roof if you added Matlock.
Right.
You know.
I'm with Anna. I like car talk.
So I've never listened to these shows. I have, probably on the internet had, maybe in the last year listened to 3 or 4. As I said, I listened to probably 3 or 4 coverage excerpts, like maybe 2 minutes long on the internet that people direct me to. So I was just saying, I think I got my 77 cents worth. My question is a factual one, this being the only hearing before the Congress, and I really don't understand why this has to come so quickly and without the normal process. I mean, it seems like something that's a legitimate issue to look at. But it sounds like the funding goes out two ways. There's funding of the platform. I should also point out that even though I don't listen to NPR, I've gotten so many calls in my office. Obviously, a lot of my constituents do, so they feel very strongly about this. So the funding, some of it is for the platform, some of it is for content. Do we have an approximate breakdown of how much of this funding that is being rescinded here is for the platform of public radio versus the content of public radio?
Who are you speaking?
Either one of you, yeah.
Well, I can tell you that NPR's 2010 about their revenues and where they went, if that's helpful to you. The station program fees were $62.9 million, which represents 43.2%. Their corporate sponsorships were $36 million, which represents 24.7% of their budget. Their foundation grants were $14.5 million, representing 10%. Their non-programming revenue represented $11.2 million, 7.7% of that budget. And the NPR endowment distribution was $7.5 million, representing 5.2%, and gifts via the NPR Foundation, $5.1 million, representing 3.5%, and CPB, NEA, NSF competitive program grants were $4.2 million, representing 2.9%. Station membership dues, $2.8 million. I've got one more, which is 1.9%, and investment income, $1.3 million, which represents 0.9%. So,
which percent
and
was?
NPR receives no direct funding from the federal government. That's important to understand. It comes from the grants that move over from CPB, and then of course this legislation would cut all of that off.
So I guess here's the question. I mean, I think there is a public interest in supporting a platform for public broadcasting, just as there's a public interest in creating the internet funded by the government. Where there's a harder argument to make is that the government has any interest in creating particular content. Now, I understand that this platform needs to be maintained because it's very important to a lot of people, including my constituents, particularly in rural areas where it may not be economically viable, less populated areas. So it seems to me that as long as this platform is important, and I don't know whether it'll be important for 10 years or 50 years, however long it's important, I don't think it'll be important in 100 years, but I don't think any of us will be around in 100 years, but we'll see. Or we won't see, as the case may be. But Mr. Hastings will still be here, of course. But with regard to the actual content creation piece, I'm not sure why the government's involved with that piece. So I'm just trying to separate them out. I think there's a stronger public policy argument for the platform that is important.
Well, I don't think you're going to find that the government, the federal government, or any of its agencies are actually shaping and producing the content for this. We're talking about the federal dollars that are spread across 413 stations in 47 states and territories, including Guam and Puerto Rico. So I think that we're getting a little jumbled here and turning this thing into a hairball, and it's not. It's not. It's very clear what this bill does. You either agree or disagree with it. I came here, Ms. Blackburn came here, we hold different views. Yeah. But this is targeted so that it would, NPR, National Public Radio, would be cut off from all federal funding and prevent any grants to them and any support that's extended to NPR by CPB. And that's what the bill does. And
so that clearly seems very draconian. I mean,
I think that it is. And I think that when you see or read or hear about this, how broad and deep and diverse this audience is, it spans every single part of our country, every single community. So when people say, the American people don't want this, don't want that. You know what? I mean, the facts, if we had a hearing, don't support that. But I guess this is our public hearing here because we didn't have a hearing in the committee. So thank you for allowing me to place some of the facts on the table.
Thanks. Ms. Blackburn, do you have anything to clarify on kind of the difference between the platform
Yes,
and the
and
content?
I thank you for the opportunity to do that, and I appreciate that you separated the platform from the operations, because under this legislation, you would still be able to use federal funds for that platform and operations. You could not use it to pay NPR dues, and you could not use those federal funds to pay for purchasing programming to pull onto that local station. There are 600 stations around this country. Now, it's exactly what you just said, supporting the platform, but not supporting the content. You could still go after grants to bring that money into the local community to create local programming and thereby creating those jobs. So I have a copy of the financials that I would be pleased to submit, Mr. Chairman, for the record, and I think that you would enjoy seeing this because... Thank you, Mr. Chairman, because what it does is to break this out as to what they're using for their news information, for their engineering. It even gets into their line item for their digital media, which the NPR.org, of course, we know there is more that is moving that direction. And I would be pleased to submit this, and I thank you for the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, and it sounds like if, through the regular order and through the regular process rather than a bill without even 72-hour notice, there might be the ability to come to agreement with some members of our caucus on some of these things. I think, again, this is a platform that's very important. It certainly has many of my constituents very upset that, that this is happening so quickly all of a sudden here. And I would love, more time to look through these issues. But obviously, this is something that seems draconian in its initial approach, and leads to a whole lot of questions about how the funds can. I mean, I was even a little bit confused when you said it doesn't actually save any money. The money's actually still sent out to the local affiliates. So I don't even see what's being done to NPR. They're still getting every penny that they were going to get. Is that right, Ms. Blackburn? Or
they cannot use the money that was there. See, what I think will eventually happen, as NPR has said, they really don't need our money. Well, then don't allow the use of those federal dollars to be used for NPR dues. Don't let them be used for buying back that programming. Go raise that money if you want to do that. Ms. Eshoo mentioned how she liked that they met local needs and the diversity of the programming. Well, NPR should develop programming with those local affiliates and then put that content, make that available.
They do.
And there should be, yes, they do,
They do.
and they should do more.
So,
of that.
and maybe the answer, reclaiming my time, is some type of, NPR reform. I mean, this is on the one hand kind of being presented as eliminate funding, then we find out it actually doesn't eliminate funding, but maybe there's a better way to work the funding so it's used for the right things by the right people in the right way, which maybe we can agree it isn't currently, or some of it isn't. But this is all what happens through regular order. I'm not even on the committee of jurisdiction. I trust their ability to put something together that makes a lot more sense. Here we are, 11th hour, Rules Committee, just eliminate the whole thing, although we find out it's actually not eliminated. It's the same amount of money. So I just, where are we? And I mean, all I can do is vote no and just hope that there's a more thoughtful process.
I think that this has become a combination of Rules Committee discussion and then policy substance discussion that really belongs in a hearing in the Committee of Jurisdiction. And that doesn't really help anyone. Now, if anybody has walked in and they made up their minds before they walked in, then this has been very boring to them. But it demonstrates the importance of having the Committee of Jurisdiction really sort through all of this. I appreciate the questions that have been asked, the time that's been given. I think that NPR is a national treasure. And I think national and public and 477 stations, including Guam and Puerto Rico, the number of listeners, the variety of content. Look, this is a squeeze on NPR. There's no two ways about it. If you cut off all federal funding, you don't allow CPB to extend support to NPR, and then that 25% manifests itself someplace. And I mean, it's been said that content is being supported, but if you have to choose between content and keeping the station going, it's very difficult to make it up in contributions. I think it's terrific that members here have said that they send their contributions, but that is not going to make up for what you are barring under 1076. So I appreciate this. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I think that we've
again,
really
I think I wish that it would be nice to begin a real discussion about reforming, improving NPR. I'm just not quite sure how this thing sort of dropped in here at the 11th hour and rushing through is productive in that regard. But I'm happy to engage in that discussion with anybody, and I hope it gets to go back to the committee to do some thoughtful work, and I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Polis. Thanks to both of you for...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, members of the committee.
Appreciate it. Mr. McGovern, I see that you have two amendments. You've talked about your Fox News amendment here, and I don't know if you'd like to offer any comments.
I'll speak to them during the consideration.
During the consideration. Good, thank you. And that closes the hearing portion for consideration of this measure, and we will distribute the rule and look to Ms. Fox for a motion.
Mr. Chairman.
Chair will be in receipt of a motion from Ms. Fox.
Mr. Chair, I move the committee grant H.R. 1076, a bill to prohibit federal funding of National Public Radio. Mr. Chairman, could we wait till all the conversations have gone?
I think they're working on their amendments here, so please proceed.
Okay.
We know exactly what it is you're doing. We've got it in front of us.
A bill to prohibit federal funding of National Public Radio and the use of federal funds to acquire radio content, a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member, minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
You've heard the motion of the gentlewoman. Let me just say that I think that the argument for procedure we have before us was most clearly articulated by Ms. Eshoo when she said it's very clear exactly what this bill does. You either agree or disagree. And so are there any amendments? Ms. Slaughter? Mr. McGovern?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have two amendments. I move that the committee make an order and provide any necessary waivers for amendment number 2 offered by me, Mr. McGovern, which would prohibit funds from any federal agency from being used to advertise on Fox News Channel or foxnews.com. I'd like to speak to it.
Please.
Mr. Chairman, this bill that has been brought before the Rules Committee today is a bad idea. We all know what's going on here. The reason this bill is before us is that a discredited right-wing activist recently made a selectively edited 11-minute video of a 2-hour conversation. The target of his little sting was a fundraising executive at NPR who no longer works there. That executive made what appeared to be disparaging remarks about the Republican Party. Now, if you look at what he actually said in full, in context, it's clear that he was paraphrasing what other Republicans had said about the direction of the party. In any case, there is absolutely no reason at all to cut off funds for NPR because of this issue. There is no reason to jeopardize the news and entertainment that millions and millions of Americans rely on and enjoy. But if you insist on going down this road, Mr. Chairman, then we should be fair and balanced in the way we do it. Over the past several years, it has become clear that the Fox News Channel is widely biased. They continue to employ a talk show host who called President Obama a racist. They continue to employ several prospective Republican presidential candidates as analysts, giving them hours and hours of free airtime, and their parent company has donated millions and millions of dollars to GOP-linked groups. My amendment would prohibit federal funds, taxpayer dollars, from being used for advertising on the partisan political platform of Fox News. If my friends on the other side of the aisle want to strip funding from NPR because they believe wrongly, in my view, that NPR is biased, then we should be given the same opportunity.
You've heard the motion of the gentleman. Let me just say very briefly that the notion of saying that an advertiser who is getting something in return is somehow similar to the notion of taking 77 cents from every American to support. May I complete my thought? I think the gentleman made his argument, if I might. The notion of comparing advertising with compelling taxpayer support of an entire entity is, to me, apples and oranges. The amendment is non-germane. As you know, this amendment deals specifically with radio, and it's getting into a completely different topic. And I see really no correlation with someone who, just one moment, with someone, whether it's the federal government or not, choosing to advertise to a large audience, making a case for a particular issue, whether it's recruitment for the military or whatever decision is made there, versus compelling taxpayer support for an overall entity. And I'm happy to yield to my friend.
Mr. Chairman, let me be clear. I'm not talking. Private advertising is. We're not talking about that here at all. If anyone wants to advertise on Fox News, they can. What I'm talking about is the fact that the taxpayers of this country spend millions and millions.
Well, if I could reclaim my time, I will say that it is very clear. It's very clear that a decision is made by it, be it by a government or a private entity, to advertise for a reason. Military recruitment is something that a choice is made. Now, if the gentleman wants to do everything in his power to offer amendments to the appropriation bill to ensure that there is not funding, I mean, I will tell you, I'm one of the few Republicans who voted to deny taxpayer funding of $800,000 for advertising on race cars. I supported the Democrats in that amendment, and I think that people can make that choice. But the notion of taking the advertising issue and coupling that with compulsory support of an entire radio network is, to me, apples and oranges. I'm happy to further yield, my friend.
The fact of the matter is that the American people have no choice in how their taxpayer dollars are spent on advertising. We're not talking about private entities. We're talking about government entities. Hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money is used to advertise. I have no choice. No citizen has any choice.
Well, if I can reclaim my time again, I will tell you that every American has a choice when they go to the polls and chooses to elect a Congress and a president that is going to move in the direction of either supporting public broadcasting or not supporting public broadcasting, or supporting a notion of an administration paying for advertising to recruit people to serve in our nation's armed forces.
Well, it's not just that, Mr. Chairman.
Or not.
It's census. It's a whole bunch of other stuff. These networks make a lot of money off of taxpayers, the taxpayers of this country.
I'm going to urge a no vote on the amendment, and Mr. Polis would like to be recognized.
Thank you. I will encourage that the amendment be made in order. I think this is an example of the discussion that should occur on the floor. I will be opposing the amendment after I am confident that this committee does make it in order. I think it's a very dangerous precedent, both of these things. I mean, I think there's some ideology involved with going after NPR, and I think there's some ideology involved with going after Fox. This whole area makes me very uncomfortable, and I think it's not a good bill. I think it's not a good amendment. I just wish we would drop the whole thing. But I do think that the more discussion we can have, the better. I'll yield to Mr. McGovern for a moment.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And again, as I mentioned in my testimony, this is a dangerous road we're going down. And I raise this amendment not because I want to limit necessarily federal funds that go to any TV station for legitimate advertising. But, I mean, I think what is happening here in this committee, it was very clear by what Ms. Blackburn said, this has become an ideological battle within the Republican Party. And I think we're going down this road that will have a chilling impact on news organizations as to whether or not they can report as they see fit. So as I said at the beginning, this is not the way I would prefer we go. But I want to point out, I'm trying to dramatize a point here, that we're going down a very slippery slope, and this whole bill should be rejected from going to the floor. And so I thank the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman, and I yield back.
Let me just say again that the bill is not germane. The amendment's not germane to the bill, and I urge my colleagues to vote no. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the
I
noes
ask for
have it.
your roll
Clerk,
call.
call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox. No. Mr. Bishop. You would have added Matlock to it. No. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Webster. No. Ms. Slaughter. Aye. Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. Hastings.
Aye.
Mr. Polis.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman.
No to this amendment and Matlock. And clerk will report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
And the motion is not agreed to. There are further amendments.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. McGovern.
I move that the committee make an order and provide the necessary waivers for amendment number 1 offered by me, which would require a GAO study on the expenditures by all federal agencies of all federal funds for advertising on television and radio. If I may be heard on that. Sure. You know, we've heard here today from members of this committee and from Ms. Blackburn that they're concerned about, they want this bill because they're concerned about the deficit. They don't believe that the federal taxpayer should subsidize public radio. Well, the federal government subsidizes media companies all the time. And according to a RAND study, the Department of Defense alone spends over $600 million in advertising in 2007. And I'm not even getting into the other agencies, which spend probably equal to that amount when all is said and done. I believe we should figure out whether that spending is a good use of taxpayer dollars or not. And my amendment would simply direct the General Accounting Office, GAO, to study how and where this money is being spent. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer money is being spent on advertising, not on improving anybody's life necessarily, but on advertising. I think people ought to know where it goes, and we ought to be able to have a discussion as to whether or not it's the proper use of taxpayer dollars or not. And some things may be, some things may not be. But this is what this amendment would simply seek to do.
You've heard the gentleman's motion. Let me say, just as the last amendment was non-germane, this amendment is non-germane as well, and I think that one has to make a determination as to whether or not recruitment for people into our armed forces does, in fact...
Well, Mr. Chairman, if the gentleman yield, that's not all that this is about, and I'm not challenging necessarily the legitimacy of whether or not the recruitment is... No, I'm simply saying that this money is being spent. I think it's a legitimate question to ask whether this is the proper way the money should be spent, whether there are better ways for recruitment or not. And but it's not just that; it's other agencies as well. And given this difficult time, I think we should know what, in fact, we're spending. We don't know that. If we had a hearing, we might be able to figure it out.
Mr. Woodall.
Mr. Chairman, I would just ask my friend, I know you said your last amendment wasn't a serious proposal. It wasn't even something you believed in. You just were doing it to make a point. If this is a serious proposal, I understand that it's not germane, and I believe germaneness should mean something. But if this is something that you're interested in drafting and dropping on the floor, and you're looking for a bipartisan co-sponsor, I believe this is incredibly important. But honestly, I can't tell whether you believe it's important or if this is just another tit-for-tat making a political point amendment.
I do believe it's important because, quite frankly, we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars.
Absolutely.
And it's not just military recruitment, I should tell you. But the question comes down to, is that the best way to spend taxpayer dollars? And, look, I think it's germane to this. We should, that's why I asked for a waiver. I don't see why we can't, you know as well as I do, that this bill will probably go nowhere because my name is in the lead. So maybe we can get you to be the lead sponsor. It might see the light of day, but...
We're always happy to listen to your proposal.
Well, I was about to say, if H.R. 1 is any indication, amendments carried under the name of Democrats have been ever as successful as those under the name of the Republican. I think that's a real testimony to the openness that this House has shown this cycle. So if this is a serious proposal, I hope we'll be able to...
That's why the Rules Committee can grant it a waiver. And given the fact that there were no hearings on this bill, I'd like to think that we can have a full and free and fair and full discussion on the House floor.
Yeah, this is a big enough issue. I'd like to see it as a standalone. I'll have to vote no, but I would look forward to working with you to get that introduced.
Thank you. The vote occurs on the McGovern amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the
I ask for a roll call.
Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox. No. Mr. Bishop. No. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Scott. No. Mr. Webster. No. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Mr. McGovern.
Aye.
Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Polis. Aye. Mr. Chairman.
No. Clerk, report the total.
4 yeas, 7
And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments?
Yes,
Mr. Hastings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee report an open rule for consideration of H.R. 1076, and I'd like to be heard. Just very briefly, I'd like to be heard on it. Thank you. If this bill is going to be rushed to the floor without hearings or markups or even 72 hours for members and the public to read it, then I think the members of the House of Representatives ought be allowed to offer amendments.
Thank the gentleman for his amendment. Let me just say I hearken back to the words of the ranking member of the subcommittee from the Energy and Commerce Committee, Ms. Eshoo, who said it's very clear what this bill does. You either agree or disagree, and that leads me to conclude that an up or down vote is
One
what would you have, Solomon,
additional
to urge
item.
I'm happy to yield to my friend.
Yeah, one additional item, Mr. Chairman. We do have the prerogative, and Mr. McGovern made the request that we grant a waiver. In light of the fact that we only received the measure yesterday, there could be members that might be working with council on significant amendments to the legislation, and that's why regular order.
Well, let me reclaim my
should
time
be
and say
yes,
that this
of course.
measure is in compliance with the 3-day layover provision that is there. The bill has been out there, and members have had an opportunity to see it, and I think that at this juncture, I would stand in support of the words of Ms. Eshoo. You either agree or disagree, so I'm urging a no vote on the amendment. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Pay the chair the noes have it. The motion is not agreed to. Are there further? Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions, Ms. Fox. No. Mr. Bishop. No. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Scott. Ms. Webster. No. Ms. Slaughter. Aye. Mr. McGovern. Aye. Mr. Hastings. Aye. Mr. Foley. Aye. Mr. Chairman.
No. And the clerk report the total.
4 yeas, 7 nays.
And the motion is not agreed to. Are there further amendments? If not, the vote occurs. Oh, you have an amendment, Mr. Webster.
I'd like to offer Amendment 3 because I think the minority made a good point. This does not reduce the deficit. This amendment added to this would reduce the deficit in that it would take the money, instead of rolling it back into public broadcasting, it would use it to pay down the debt. And I think we ought to stick by that. If I read Mr. Cantor's description of it, it says, as we continue to identify ways to cut spending and save valuable resources, then that's what we want to do. If we want to cut spending and save valuable resources, we ought to roll this into reducing the deficit. I thought the minority was correct on that particular criticism.
Well, I thank the gentleman for bringing the proposal forward. I will say again that this does not fall within the jurisdiction. It's non-germane because this would fall within the jurisdiction of the House Ways and Means Committee. And so the amendment is non-germane to the bill itself. And so I'm going to encourage my...
Well, could I ask a question of the chair then?
Sure. Happy.
This bill does direct where the money would go. This amendment directs where the money would go. So my question is, the bill allows the receipts to be spent on funds other than the purposes that are designated.
I will say to the gentleman, this simply states where the money does not go. It doesn't direct where it does go, because it obviously has begun at the Corporation of Public Broadcasting before it is disseminated to National Public Radio. And for that reason, the Ways and Means Committee would have jurisdiction for this, and so it is not germane to the bill. So, would the gentleman like to withdraw the amendment in light of the fact that it's non-germane and falls within the jurisdiction of the Ways and Means Committee?
Not particularly. I think that, you know, when we were given this information about what we were going to do when we came here, I relied on what I got, which was, as we continue to identify ways to cut spending and save valuable resources. Well, we're not saving valuable resources. We're just going to spend them somewhere else. I'm not sure if I see the reason for doing it. But anyway, that's my thought. I don't understand it. I'm not sure why we're not taking the money and rolling it back into some sort of deficit reduction.
Right. Well, I understand. And frankly, if H.R. 1, that provision H.R. 1 is successful, we obviously will be in a much different situation in that we have zero funding for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. And and I know that people have concluded that the Senate did vote against it, the House has passed it. It's in negotiation right now between the Senate and the House and the White House, even though the Senate has passed nothing out. And so I think that I share the goal that my friend has. This clearly is an opportunity for the institution to specifically go on record on the issue of National Public Radio. And again, it doesn't fall within the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Will the gentleman,
I'm thinking about it. I don't see how this would be not germane in that yes, I understand that bills that go to the Appropriation Committee do things. If this were to come from them, they would have done the same thing we're getting ready to do in this bill. This bill was only given, they were actually reducing spending, changing spending, which seems to be like an appropriation. It would have gone to a committee that would have had maybe the jurisdiction to do that. I don't know whether they did or didn't.
let me say to my friend that this bill was only referred to the Energy and Commerce Committee. It was not referred to the Ways and Means Committee. This amendment specifically deals with an issue that the Ways and Means Committee would have within its jurisdiction, and that's the reason that it does not relate to this bill that's before us.
Okay, I'll withdraw it.
Thank you. Gentleman's withdrawn. Vote occurs on the motion of the gentlewoman from Grandfather Community. Those in favor will say aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. Clerk, call the roll.
Mr. Sessions. Ms. Fox. Aye. Mr. Bishop. Aye. Mr. Woodall. Aye. Mr. Nugent. Aye. Mr. Scott. Aye. Mr. Webster. No. Ms. Slaughter. No. Mr. McGovern. No. Mr. Hastings. No. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Chairman.
Aye. Clerk will report the total.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
And the motion is agreed to, and accordingly this will be carried by Mr. Nugent for the majority and for Mrs. Slaughter for the minority. So without objection, the committee stands adjourned.